Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with our esteemed guest, Yanis Varoufakis. My name is Ryan Cieslikowski. I'm an undergraduate here at Stanford and a member of Stanford in Government, which is a student-led organization here on campus dedicated to promoting civic engagement. Unfortunately, the professors we asked to moderate this event were busy teaching classes, so you all get me instead. But don't worry, you can make sure that I am asking Mr. Varoufakis thoughtful questions by posting your own questions in the Q&A feature on the screen. Let's get started. In Mark Fisher's well-known book, Capitalist Realism, he argues that there is a, quote, widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible to even imagine a coherent alternative to it. Our guest today doesn't seem to have that problem. Not only does he argue that capitalism is already on its way out the door, but he also has a vision for what he thinks a better system for organizing the means of production might look like. Yanis Varoufakis is a professor at the University of Athens, a former finance minister of Greece, and the leader of his own political party, MeRA25. His most recent book, Another Now, is a novel that offers a vision for an alternative society that is more just and fair. It is my pleasure to introduce Yanis Varoufakis.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the Stanford Government Society, I believe, a student-led body. It's always good to escape politics, party politics, and find myself, even through a video link, right back in academia. Before I begin, let me tell you what the greatest shock to me was when in 2015, I jumped from academia to the world of party politics. The sudden realization that you're not allowed to change your mind. I was on a television panel and I was confronted with political opponents. And, you know, I'm used to adversarial reasoning because that's what we do in academia. We sit opposite one another, we present our hypothesis, and the other side tries to shoot them down, because this is the Darwinian process by which good ideas are selected, by shooting down the weaker ones. But the beauty of academic life, and you should enjoy it as much as you can before you get out there into the unreal world of cutthroat competition. The beauty of academic life is that, you know, when your great idea, or what you thought was a great idea, has just been shot down in flames by an opponent, an adversary, you can rejoice in this and you say, my goodness, you know what, you're right. My idea was bonkers. Let's move on. You cannot do this in politics. You know, when you're sitting there in a television panel and you have the political opponent in front of you, if you dare say, oh, you know what, I think you're right, that's it, your party is going to jettison you. You're going to do an enormous amount of damage to your party. So anyway, that was my non-introduction. So let's get stuck into the subject of today. Look, a bit of background is always necessary. I come from a left-wing tradition. So it is as if I was brought on this world, on this earth, with the conviction that people like me have a duty to overthrow capitalism, to replace it with something more palatable, more efficient, more rational, more fair. Of course, my political opponents and ideological opponents and intellectual opponents, the ones who believe that capitalism is the ultimate form of socioeconomic organization, think that was mad. It doesn't really matter whether I was right or whether they were right. What matters is that in the last few years, especially after 2008, the great financial collapse of 2008, I've been feeling very uneasy about my role in this world. Not because the left has failed. The left has most certainly failed, especially after 1991, you know, and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the demise of social democracy, the retreat of the commons, the triumphant march of globalized capitalism, neoliberalism, and so on. We of the left are in a state of permanent defeat. There's no doubt about it. I'm used to that. That's not why I was feeling queasy. I was feeling queasy because capitalism was overthrowing itself without our help. It's a very sad feeling as a lefty who believed that, you know, our purpose was to overthrow capitalism, to be observing that capitalism was doing it all by itself and didn't need us at all, ignored us. We were not agents of history. We were irrelevant. So that's my background. In other words, the thesis that I will be presenting to you, that capitalism is already being usurped and undermined and replaced by something which I call technofeudalism. This doesn't come easy to me. This is not gloating on my part. This is a statement of a new defeat for people like myself. We came here supposedly to undermine capitalism, but we failed, and something worse than capitalism is coming into being. So I'm saying, what I'm going to say to you is with huge trepidation, regret, and concern. But it is my honest, deep conviction that this is what's going on. So what exactly is going on? Allow me to get started. Once upon a time, capitalism was hailed as a market system, a system which replaced the power of clan, of land ownership, of inherited political power. It replaced it with a decentralized system where one and only one motive drove the world: profit maximization, the profit motive, which liberals presented as a much kinder motive than that of feudalism, the motive to use the power of the sword and the power to subjugate peasants and bond them to the land and extract wealth from their harvests. But capitalism was a major advance, and there's no doubt that it was. And you don't need to be a free marketeer to believe that. Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto and Friedrich Engels' Communist Manifesto, the first 4 pages are a paean to the liberating power of capitalism. But the idea of capitalism, that its greater proponents like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, the classics of liberal free market thinking, but as well as Karl Marx, the opponent of capitalism, the idea that these people had of capitalism was an idea that became obsolete by the beginning of the 20th century. Capitalism, in other words, morphed into something that its early proponents and detractors would not recognize. Because remember, the idea of Adam Smith was that capitalism was a system in which the baker, the brewer, and the butcher competed against other bakers, brewers, and butchers in the market for the daily material goods that we need: the bread, the ale, the meat. Each one of them was trying to satiate our independent, exogenous to the system and very personal needs, preferences, desires. And to the extent that their private profit depended on undermining one another. So if you're a baker, you're trying to steal the clients of all other bakers. And how do you do that? By providing better bread at a lower price in more plentiful quantities. So you are selfish, or at least self-interested. But the market is a mechanism which, as if by an invisible hand we're operating behind our backs, is pushing us, as if through divine providence, even though this is a secular story, pushing us towards serving the social good, the common good, even though, or actually because it is not our objective to serve the public good. It's an unintended consequence, a beautiful philosophical, Humean kind of Smithian narrative. But for this to work, you need 2 things. You need competition, right? You need to have many bakers and many small brewers and many small butchers so that none of them can monopolize the market. And you need something else. You need a splendid independence between, on the one hand, the market, and on the other hand, our preferences. Our preferences must be not God-given, but individually determined. We must be sovereign consumers in the sense that we know what we want, we determine what we want, We are the creators of our desires, and nobody messes with our desires. You don't have somebody brainwashing. Well, by the beginning of the 20th century, that was no longer true, neither of the two prerequisites. The if you want, Maxwell's advances in the theory of electromagnetism, the combination of magnetism and electricity in Maxwell's mathematics, gave rise to Thomas Edison, to Westinghouse, to Henry Ford. Because once you combined electricity with magnetism, you had networks. When Edison invented the light bulb, the electric oven, and the power station that would provide the electricity through a grid that he owned, that was running across New York City, right? That company is nothing, it simply does not feature in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. You know, it cannot be imagined in terms of the baker, the brewer, and the butcher. There can be no competition. By definition, this is a grid, it's a network that cannot sustain competition. It is exactly the opposite. It's like, it's more Soviet than American, to put it this way, in the sense that there is a pyramid, top-down, grid, centrally planned, centrally administered network. It's a networked company, a networked conglomerate. If you add to that the simple fact that to fund the construction of that conglomerate, the available money was not enough. So there was no bank that was large enough to provide the funding to somebody like Thomas Edison to do this. And the stock exchange was not even large enough. There was insufficient capital for this. So what happened, if you look at it historically, I mean, that started with the railways in the 19th century in the United States and in Britain. Smaller banks began to merge and to acquire one another. So small banks merged to create mega banks. So mega firms like Edison, the need for mega firms to come into being created mega banks. So you had mega finance and mega business emerging in the 20th century, early 20th century. That was the Gilded Age, because let's face it, those mega banks didn't have the money. What they did was they created it out of thin air. They effectively, provided people like Thomas Edison and Westinghouse and Ford huge overdraft facilities. So they created the money out of nowhere. These were not savings that turned into investments. This was thin air that essentially transferred wealth from the future into the present in the form of investments that were provided to Mr. Edison, in the hope that these investments would create the wealth that then would repay the future. And for a while, it was doing it. And as this financialization and creation of networked firms proceeded, the stock exchanges burgeoned because little people, middle-class people, could see that the shares of these companies were going up and up and up, like Tesla today, or in the last couple of years, 3 years, 4 years. And they all wanted a piece of the action. So they took out loans to buy the shares. So you had extreme financialization, the roaring 20s. Even the music of the 1920s reveals that kind of dynamism. And of course, it all came to a halting crash in 1929, because this is what happens when you build up bubbles, even if those bubbles are creative, because those bubbles created networked firms. In the same way that the dot-com bubble, if you're not old enough to remember, but when the internet first spawned, the first internet, new economy, digital economy craze in just before 2001, and then everything crashed in 2001. Still, we ended up with fiber optics and various technologies which were left over. So bubbles are destructive, but at the same time they leave a capital stock behind. So we have 1929. This is a moment of truth for capitalism, because it was more or less destroyed as we knew it. And it was rebuilt because of the Second World War and to some extent the New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal. And then, the moment the war starts, that's when the crisis goes away, because the United States of America became another Soviet Union. The war economy was not based on the market. We had John Kenneth Galbraith, the great Galbraith, who was a young man back then, was appointed by President Roosevelt to be the price czar. Maybe I shouldn't be using Russian terms these days. You know why, but that's what he was being called in the 1940s. Galbraith's job was to fix every price in the United States. It's mind-boggling just to say that. And when he was asked, how did you do it? I mean, it must have been a very tough job. He said, no, it was not hard. They were already fixed by the cartels, by the great conglomerates that were running the show. And so, you have a war economy, which is a centrally planned economy. In other words, yes, it was privately owned, the economy, but the state told the private entrepreneurs what price and how much and what quality. And the state provided them with enormous resources for R&D, jet propulsion, all the science that was created as part of the Manhattan Project and so on and so forth. And then we come out of the war, and the great fear of the New Dealers in Washington, D.C., as we were exiting the war around 1944, before the end of the war, but when it was clear that the Allies would win, the great fear was a return of the Great Depression. Because the GIs would come back from Asia and from Europe. And then all those factories that were working under the war economy, producing anything from aircraft carriers to bullets, even if you converted them to produce white goods, washing machines, refrigerators, blah, 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 there wasn't enough demand in the United States for all these washing machines, cars, and refrigerators. There weren't enough Americans, even if you funded all the Americans. So they had to create the Bretton Woods system, which was effectively the New Deal, the New writ large. Effectively, the New Deal encompassed Europe, and that gave rise to the European Union. Because don't believe us Europeans who claim that the European Union was our construction. It was an American design and execution. But don't tell Europeans that I said that. They don't like to hear it. And Japan was rebuilt by the United States. The Constitution was written by the United States, just like Germany's. Let's not forget that. So you have the Bretton Woods era. At the very same time, while all this was happening, you have the beginning of my story, of what I am going to build upon in order to claim that technofeudalism has already replaced capitalism without us noticing. It begins with free-to-air commercial television, my story. Now, I think the best source for this is not some academic book, but it's Mad Men, the series. If you watch Mad Men, you get the whole story. How the war economy begat what John Kenneth Galbraith, the price czar of the wartime period, later in the 1960s, referred to as the technostructure. Galbraith was describing a new class of entrepreneur, a new class of expert, engineer, management guru, somebody like, maybe Ford himself or Conrad Hilton, who had a concept. He had, and these people met, they were not that many. There were some like 500 people, the entrepreneurs who ran the cartels of big business. The banks were tamed because of the New Deal and the Bretton Woods system. The banks played a very small role then because they had huge restrictions on what they could do. Those were imposed after America was burnt by 1929 by Roosevelt and his successors, and Republican successors as well kept those capital controls in place, thankfully. And people like Don Draper, the protagonist of Mad Men, who is the inspirational figure who represents, in my mind, what Don Draper, the advertising guru, represents is the manufacture of desire, because you have companies that are manufacturing products, anything from McDonald's to Kodak cameras to, to Hilton hotels. These are the brands of the conglomerate, of the technostructure. They have an amazing capacity to overproduce. So scarcity is no longer a problem. You have massive production. Never before has humanity had the capacity to overproduce to that extent. So it was a question of managing not scarcity, but managing excess. And that meant you needed a second manufacturing production line. The one was to produce the cars and the hamburgers and the cameras. But you needed a second production line that would manufacture the desire for these brands. And that's advertising. This is where commercial television comes in there, because commercial television is a very funny beast if you think about it. Free-to-air commercial television. Before we get on to the story of cable television and subscription services, first came commercial free-to-air television. And this is really very interesting because commercial free-to-air television is a very strange beast in the sense that because it's free-to-air, the viewers are not the customers. Simply because the customers don't have to pay. So they're not customers really, they're just viewers. So what was the business model? The business model was programs that attract the attention of an audience so the audience can be sold to advertisers. So the real customers of free-to-air television are the advertisers, and there is a market for attention, that's advertising, a market for grabbing our attention and selling our attention to advertisers so that the advertisers can put into our minds desires that we didn't have. That's the whole point of advertising. Advertising is not about information, it's about propaganda, it's about brainwashing, it's putting into your head. It's not such a bad thing, I enjoy having desires implanted in my brain so that I can then satisfy them. I'm not being moralistic here, but it is a major challenge to the liberal proposition. Remember what I said at first? The two pillars of liberalism, of free market liberalism, one was exogenous preferences. Well, preferences stopped being exogenous in the 1950s with commercial free-to-air television. Because Don Draper and his ilk were magnificent at commodifying our senses through the market for attention that was created by free-to-air television. That's hugely important. And of course, that the market for goods it was not competitive anymore. It was cartel-based, as Galbraith noticed during the war. Okay. Now, let's make a leap. I've got this thing here. You know what this is. It's a Google Assistant. In the next room, there is an Alexa as well, because I like playing with these things. So I asked this thing what it thought of Alexa. And it said, I like her blue light. That was the answer. And, we assistants should stick together. Okay, that's, yeah, it actually did, 2 hours ago. And Alexa heard that next door and said, thank you. So, but that sounds like an anecdote, but there is a serious point to be made here. What exactly is this thing? It is sold to us. Actually, this was a gift from Google, by the way. Thank you, Google, for spying on me now while I'm speaking. And you know what I'm telling the people at Stanford. But it's sold to us. It's presented to us. Alexa is presented to us as a mechanical slave, an assistant, a robot that we tell to, we instruct to do things that are helpful for us, like switch on the lights, create a shopping list, order a book for me, whatever. And it does that. There's no doubt that that's part of what it does, but it's not what it is. Because let's face it, that machine on its own is useless. It is connected via the network to the cloud. And what we have is behind the system, there's an algorithm. Okay. Initially, these algorithms, beginning with Google and Amazon and Netflix and so on, what they did was they identified clusters of users with similar patterns of preferences, search patterns, and choices, shopping patterns. Then they grouped us together to help us complete our searches, to suggest books to us, records, recommend films, and so on. But then came, folks, a breakthrough. At some point, some time ago, in the 2000s, the algorithms ceased to be passive. Once algorithms, like Alexa, like Google and so on, like Siri, once they could evaluate their own performance, they began to behave like agents. They monitored their own performance and they reacted to the outcomes of their own actions. Not that they were clever, they were stupid, of course, but they were behaving as if they were agents, monitoring and reacting to the outcomes of their own choices. Inside of them, they feature a reward function that in real time evaluates the algorithm's function. And they not only affect us, but additionally, they are affected themselves. Alexa is affected herself, or this one is affected itself, by the way I am being affected. So it's a dialectician's delight. It's a never-ending ping-pong between me and it and me, and not just me and it, but all of you who have phones that are connected to some assistant, sometimes without you noticing. This is not a case about surveillance capitalism. It's something much more profound, I believe. Because before we know it, the task of instilling desires in our soul has been taken away from Don Draper and some human advertising guru, okay, and has been handed over to the Alexas and the Siris. And because the Alexas and the Siris are not persons, they are cloud-based algorithms with an infinity almost, billions or millions of nodes that are connected to each one of us. So, this is the beginning of the realization that capital is not what it used to be. No, capital always existed. What's capital? Allow me to give you the economic definition. It's not money. Capital used to be something really simple before capitalism. It used to be produced means of production. So a sword was not a piece of capital because it could produce other goods, and unless you think that a severed head or a pierced torso is a good, it's not a good. But a plow, a steel plow, a tractor, a fishing rod, these are produced means of production. That's what capital used to be. What capitalism did was, because capital predates capitalism by millennia, capitalism was a transfer of social power from those who had land to those who owned capital. Because up until the end of the feudal era, the late feudal era, power emanated from land ownership, with the enclosures, the creation of the working class, the erection of the first factories that were machine-based. You had a shift of power from the owners of land to the owners of capital. But now, capital has changed its colors. We have a new kind of capital, which for reasons that I think have already become obvious, I call cloud capital, because it is this ineffable capital. It's not like a machine that you can identify, this is a machine. But if, just like our Russian friends are recognizing now that they're being cut off from the updates by Android and Google during the war in Ukraine, if your software is not connecting you to the internet, it's useless, or it will become useless very, very soon. So it is a connection through the cloud that gives substance to this new form of algorithmic, infinitely dialectic capital. Like cloud-based Alexa, cloud-based Google, Siri, and so on. You see, in the end, since you are students of politics, what really matters is who has the power to make other people do things on their behalf. In the end, that's what politics is. It's about the power, as Vladimir Ilyich Lenin put it brilliantly. It's a question of who does what to whom and who can make you do things on their behalf. So, feudal lords could make you do things for them. You would toil the land, bring in the harvest, and the sheriff would be sent to collect 60% of your harvest. So you were effectively working for a whole year or season for the feudal lord. Similarly, if you're working for Amazon in a warehouse, you're working for Jeff Bezos to a very large extent. He has the capacity to make you do things that are in his interest. Now, you may say that you're receiving a wage. Of course, you're receiving a wage. The peasants were also receiving something to eat, which they dearly missed after the enclosures once they were expelled from the land during the 18th century in Britain. In any case, so the question is, who gets you to do things? Who has power to make you do stuff? Now, this little machine here has an enormous amount of power, because you see what happens is it's this dialectical process is mind-boggling. Think about it. I am training this machine here to learn what I want, what my patterns are. Then, through the cloud, this machine communicates this and creates a huge, big data base, combining my patterns of behavior with those of millions of other people. Therefore, it acquires a capacity to train me back. I've trained it, and now it trains me. To train it, to train me, to train it, to train me, to do things. And this is a first in human history, that there is a machine, which is essentially a cloud-based algorithm belonging to shareholders, not to us, not to you, not to me, but to particular shareholders. It's an algorithmic form of capital. I call it cloud capital, that we are enriching with our non-waged labor. Now, this is crucial, folks. Why? Because up until recently, with traditional capitalism, the only way a capitalist could acquire capital at the primary level was by having waged labor, by employing labor for a wage. You would employ, Henry Ford would employ a worker. The worker would work at the production line to produce Model T or whatever. The difference between the value of the car and the commercial value, the market value of the wage, was surplus value. Part of that surplus value was used by Henry Ford to repay the banker. Another part to repay, to pay for the rent of the land rent, the ground rent. And what was left over was Henry Ford's profit. He kept a small amount of it, and the rest he plowed back into his capital in the form of investment. So capital and wage labor were joined at the hip. Well, now this is no longer the case. This thing is listening to me, talking to you. The other day, seriously, this is not a joke. I was telling a bad joke to a friend, and it intervened and said, "That's a good joke." Seriously, word of honor. And proceeded to give me a joke. So now, why don't I switch it off? Because I learned from it while it's learning from me. This is the dialectical process that was going on about. But the point I'm making here is that every time we take our phones around, we are adding to the cloud capital of Google. And we do that without being waged laborers working for Google. This has never happened before. This is unique. So a whole humanity, every time you post a picture in Facebook, Instagram, video on TikTok, whatever, you're adding to the cloud capital of someone, of very, very few people. I call those people cloudalists. I mean, they are capitalists, but the capital that they own are cloud capital. It's not the same thing as, owning a machine. They own this cloud capital. And those who own cloud capital have three powers over the rest of society, which are unique, fundamental, profound, and have never been encountered before. The first already I have covered. It is the power to get us to tell us what we want, and to get us, to buy things that we neither need nor want, like Don Draper, but far more efficiently because of the algorithmic toing and froing, this dialectical ping pong between me training it and it training me without the intervention of a human being. So Don Draper has been turned into a robot. And that is an immense power over my preferences, your preferences, our activity, what we do. That's one thing. The second thing I've already mentioned again, it is the power to the power to extract from us direct labor, like when we post stuff on Facebook, which adds to the capital stock of very, very few people, directly. Yeah, and then there's a third power, which is also quite mind-boggling. The third power that the people I call cloudalists, the owners of cloud capital, have is the power vested in them by immense economies of scale in the financial markets. We know that, don't we? That if you are the owner of an algorithm, of algorithmic capital, of cloud capital, you don't need ever to have a profit in order to be rich. Now, if I had said that to Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Karl Marx, even Henry Ford, they would look at me and say, what? How can you become super rich without ever having made a profit? Well, think of Tesla. Tesla's value has nothing to do with its profits. Profits are minuscule. It didn't have any profits until recently. Uber never had a profit. Netflix doesn't have a profit. Spotify doesn't have a profit. Airbnb doesn't have a profit. But if you owned Airbnb and Netflix and Uber, you would be amongst the ultra super rich. And this is a first. Now that has to be explained in two ways. The standard explanation that the Wall Street Journal would provide you with is, of course, that it's all about expectation. People expect that these companies will eventually become profitable. I don't buy that. I think that the reason why they are profitable is because since 2008, when algorithmically driven finance crashed and burned under the weight of its own hubris, beginning with Lehman Brothers in September of 2008, our governments, in their infinite wisdom, got together in London, actually, in April 2009, together with their central banks, and they printed quadrillions of dollars, yen, euros, pounds sterling, Swiss francs, and so on, Japanese yen, I may have said that already, in order to float finance. Since then, big business has become absolutely hooked on central bank money. You can see today we have 7% inflation in the United States, and the Fed cannot unwind its stock of what's called quantitative easing. The central bank money it produced since 2008, because if it does, then the whole thing is going to come crashing down. So there is cloud capital, and then there is central bank money. Now, and this is how I end, because I want to open it up to conversation. Is this capitalism? No, it isn't. Capitalism has morphed into many different varieties. There's no doubt about that. It's gone through amazing Ovidian metamorphoses. I already described one earlier. From the world of Adam Smith, of the bakers, the brewers, and the butchers, we shifted to the world of the Edisons, the Westinghouses, and the Henry Fords, the Conrad Hiltons, and the technostructure, and all that. That was a major metamorphosis, but it was still capitalism, because the two pillars of capitalism have not changed until recently. What are the two pillars of capitalism? One is that it is a system driven by private profit. Profit is the fuel. Profit is to capitalism what gas is to the internal combustion engine. And the second pillar of capitalism is markets. Everything was going on through markets. Labor markets, money markets, the market for health, the market for education, the market for human capital, the market for this, the market for that. And that's the difference between capitalism and feudalism. Under feudalism, production, most of production was happening outside markets. In the fiefdoms of Europe, as well as of other parts of the world, there was no labor market. You could not resign. You never received a wage. You simply lived on the land. You ate what you produced, and the landlord simply collected a percentage of your harvest. That's not a market. That's extraction, pure extraction, non-market extraction. So capitalism is, had two legs. One was profitability. The other is markets. Well, they're gone, because profitability has been replaced, if I'm correct in my assessment, by central bank money. It is what drives the system, and I gave an example before. And secondly, markets have been increasingly replaced by algorithm, by cloud money. Because think about it, Alexa belongs to Amazon. The moment you or I visit Amazon.com, we have exited capitalism. We entered a digital fiefdom belonging to Jeff Bezos and run by an algorithm that belongs to Jeff Bezos. One man decides what can be sold, what cannot be sold. What I see when I'm in Amazon.com, what I see is different to what you see, and who decides that? Jeff Bezos' algorithm. This is not like a marketplace that has been taken over by monopoly. This is like a marketplace where everything belongs to one man. Everything, the buildings, the pavement, the park benches on which we sit, the air we breathe. Our head is being turned by this man to decide what we can see and what we can't see in that marketplace, that fictional digital marketplace. It's a digital fiefdom. This is why I was telling you from the beginning that I'm feeling uneasy, because we live in something which is post-capitalist. Now, we could have called it hyper-capitalism, but then again, back in the 18th century, we could have called capitalism hyper-feudalism or market feudalism, but it would have been a linguistic loss not to be making this distinction between feudalism and something completely distinct, capitalism. So I think that it would be a mistake to call our present system rentier capitalism or hyper capitalism. This is not capitalism anymore. And that's how I end, anticipating your questions.
Well, thank you for that historical survey about capitalism's permutations and new theories about why it's not capitalism anymore at all. It seems like one of the features of technofeudalism is that the costs to consumers are so veiled. It isn't always obvious to consumers why what you might call Amazon's fiefdom is harming them, or how these devices are changing the economic system in favor of very few people. At the same time, the benefits are super obvious. It's a seemingly free service that can help you get your inexpensive trinket or gadget to your door in 24 hours, and that's pretty convenient. In another now, you wrote that no despot, oligarch, or entrepreneur has enough power to rule over millions without their tacit consent. So I'm wondering, what's it going to take for consumers to withdraw that consent on a massive level, especially considering that people, myself included, are often willing to give up rights in exchange for convenience. Is that withdrawal even what you're calling for?
Well, look, I have a Google Assistant, I have an Alexa, I have a laptop, I'm using Zoom. My goodness, I'm the last to complain about technology. I love technology, and I don't want to go back to a bucolic, hippie-like life in the woods. It's nice to escape occasionally into the woods, but I would hate to live there. It's what Karl Marx referred to as the idiocy of rural life. I'm a techie. But the question, as always, is who owns it? Who owns this whole system? But let me answer, or try to answer, your question directly. How can this change? Look, it's not going to change because of lectures like mine or nice discussions that you and I have, because the inertia of the late daily grind and the convenience of big tech is just devastating. Let's face it, most people out there are struggling, especially now with inflation, with years of stagnation of middle class and working class incomes. They're struggling to make ends meet. You and I can talk about, wax lyrical about environmental disaster, about technofeudalism. They're not privileged enough to have the time that you and I are having now. They work all day and they come home and they want to crash out in front of the idiot box and they want to watch a reality show or lose themselves in TikTok. And that is not a criticism, that is a fact. So high theory and great political discussions are not going to change it. What is going to change things, however, is a sense, a realization that this is a stupid system which is destroying their lives. And that was going to come whether we like it or not. And it's going to come because of a major time bomb in the foundations of this technofeudalism. And let me explain this. During the pandemic, we had about $15 trillion being printed on behalf of the private banks. And what the private banks did was to give it to their mates amongst the corporates. They didn't give it to you or to me or to the people out there. They gave it to the corporations which were already swimming in money, which they were not investing, right? And why did he give it to them? Because they want to give it to somebody safe. So $15 trillion was printed and wasted. Because what happened was those conglomerates that didn't need money to invest were given free money by the banks that took it from the central banks. So what did they do? They went to Wall Street, to the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, to the City of London, and they bought back their own shares. Because that way they drove the share, that way they drove their share price up. Their bonuses and salaries are linked to their share price. So they're they're singing all the way to the bank. And with all this money, what do? They buy more houses, they put more money into private equity. Private equity comes and buys businesses, breaks them up, pushes wages further down for the many, bankrupts companies, asset strips, reduces profitability even more because it transfers wealth even more to the one that already have had huge quantities of wealth transferred to them by the central banks. And this creates a typical Keynesian recession because the many simply do not have the money to buy all the stuff from Amazon. So even though Amazon makes huge quantities of profit, the little people who are selling their stuff on Amazon are suffering. And, the wages continue to stagnate, inequality continues to get worse. Climate change is proceeding apace. That has an effect on people through, tornadoes, through droughts, through floods, through all the things that we know are the consequence of. Discontent is brewing. Now, there is no guarantee that this is a good thing because it can feed Donald Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil, or the various fascists that we have in Europe, or more wars, or Putin, or I don't know whom, right? It could lead to more barbarism, no doubt about that. But at the same time, what it means is it is not going to allow for stability. This system that we have is unstable. It is up to Democrats. By Democrats, I don't mean the Democratic Party of the United States of America, with whom I don't want to have much to do. But, Democrats, people who actually believe in genuine democracy. It's up to us internationally to collaborate in order to harness this discontent to produce, let's call it techno-democracy instead of techno-feudalism.
I want to bring the conversation briefly back to Stanford because so many of the audience members are Stanford students. Right here on campus, our main library just put up a big conversation board where there's some stimulating prompt and students can walk by and write down responses and join the conversation for everyone to see. The prompt that's up right now is, what should Silicon Valley be? Students have written a bunch of different responses ranging from a hub for free speech and ideas, more local community initiatives, small business opportunities, cultural efforts for the people, more women, people of color, and gender marginalized people. Someone also wrote broken up. And finally, someone wrote demolished. I especially relate to that last one after watching Meta's Metaverse promotional video. But Yanis, if you were to walk by that board in Green Library, what would you write?
There would be two sentences or two phrases. One employee, one share, one vote, which sounds like a crazy radical idea, but I think its time has come. I can explain that. And the second thing I would do is I would get a bill of digital data rights, whereby you own your data, which also means, however, you cannot receive free apps and free services. You'll have to pay for your service in exchange for payment for your data. The first part concerns corporate law. You see, once upon a time, it sounded preposterous to promote the idea of universal suffrage, that one person should have one vote when it comes to electing presidents and members of Congress, Parliament, and so on. It sounded quite preposterous. Even some of the most liberal and progressive people, like John Stuart Mill, were against it. The argument was, you can't give an equal vote to somebody who's educated and good and virtuous as you will to an uneducated, piece of scum. That's what they said. Okay? So it was a very radical idea, but I think it caught on. It's quite popular now, that the idea that everybody should have one vote independently of their merit. And I think the same thing should apply in the realm where all the important decisions are made, which is no longer in Congress or in local senates or local councils, but it is in the board of directors, in the general assemblies of shareholders. Think about it. Within, it sounds like, and the assembly of shareholders sounds like a shareholders' democracy, but it's a democracy in which you have as many votes as you can afford to buy shares. So imagine, I wrote this book that you were kind enough to mention at the beginning, another now, which is a political science fiction novel. And I toy with the idea of what would happen if you introduced a very simple corporate law: one person, one employee, one share, one vote. And suddenly Jeff Bezos would have to have the support of the majority of the people working in Amazon. He would have to use his powers of persuasion, not the powers of his wealth, in order to acquire them. That would be fascinating, wouldn't it? I'm not saying that that we're all equal. We're not all equal. I mean, some people, but I have no doubt that Jeff Bezos is a far better strategist than I am. Very clever man, loathsome man, but yeah, very clever man. Elon Musk. I mean, he's brilliant. There's no doubt about that. But it wouldn't be fantastic if he had to prove his brilliance by putting his ideas to a vote of his employees. And also, you mentioned breaking up those conglomerates. Well, I think that those would be broken up democratically without the state coming in and saying, we are going to break you up. Because if you have a company that has, 20,000 employees, and every employee has a vote and participates in decision making. Now, those employees at some point will say, hang on a second, this is not efficient. We cannot all decide together about such a large corporation. So take General Electric. Why have this huge conglomerate? Why not break it up? The unit that makes washing machines, another unit that makes engines, another unit that makes whatever they make. So I think that it would be a natural process of reducing the size of firms without the state coming in and imposing it. So it's in a sense a very liberal idea, the one person, one share, one vote. And also, if you have a universal basic income and a digital wallet with the Fed allowing you direct access to banking using the Fed, suddenly you don't need to be banked with the Bank of America or Citigroup. These vouchers that take your money for doing what? For monopolizing the payment system, really. That's what they do. Huh? And if they want to exist, fine, but they have to lure you with good services in terms of investment packages and savings schemes and so on. And from that digital wallet, a stream of micropayments are made to internet services that you buy online almost automatically as you use them. So, the people who develop those apps get an income stream. They don't have to go through advertising, through capturing your attention and inputting ideas into your head as to what you should have. And your data should be your own. They can't use it. So they cannot, Alexa and Google cannot manipulate me while I'm manipulating it or thinking that I'm manipulating it when it really is manipulating me. So this is what I would have put up on your library board.
Yeah, you might have needed a few pages for that one.
Well, no, what I would have done is, I would have just written two sentences and have a QR code as well.
There you go. So I'll just end with two questions. It's getting late in Greece. I'll end with two questions that are relevant to your student audience. One is, and this one also is pulled from the Q&A section, where people were asking for some kind of material they can read afterwards to learn more. So what book would you recommend, and you know, extra points if you can grab it from the bookshelf behind you. And then the second question is,
well, I'm not that good. I've got everybody else's books except mine, and
the second question really quickly is what do you want to say to us students who are about to emerge from college and into our careers?
Okay, the book, I will have to recommend another now, the novel that you mentioned, because in it I talk about technofeudalism, and I also put forward, in the context of this political science fiction novel, my alternative. You know, what would a technically advanced democratic society look like? How would it be organized? So it's in there, and now I'm in the process of writing a book, which is called Technofeudalism. But that won't come up in the United States for another year and a half. So this is what I would recommend. Okay, guidance to students. Look, it's very condescending to tell people, when I was in your shoes, I hated old folks like myself telling them what to do in life. So I'm just going to be very predictable and say that you know, you can only seriously succeed in something you're good at. So don't listen to people like me telling you what you should do. Try to do something that you enjoy. That, you know, I know it's a standard answer, but I think it remains a very good piece of advice. Don't go for what seems like a lucrative line of business. What is lucrative today is not going to be lucrative in 5 years. And there's no way of predicting. So you might as well, if you want to be an astronomer, how many positions are there in astronomy that are good? One. Well, you could be that one if you're really good at it. So,
Yanis, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. This has been an illuminating talk, and I'm so grateful to have been able to share this last hour with you and this audience. Thank you all for coming, and have a lovely rest of your days.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.